Welcome back, friends. I just got back from my vacation. We got 3 weeks of data to go through since the last balanced data slate was out. I'm sure when I was gone, everything was nice and fair and balanced, and there's no one army or detachment running away with anything. So sit back, relax, and let's get right to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps support me, support the channel, and make sure you get all my latest videos. Thanks, guys. All right, and the first thing we're going to look at is the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had just under 1,000 players, and the data slate we're sitting at just over 2,800. Number of games played was just under 4,800, and for the data slate we're sitting at just under 14,000. We had 16 tournaments last week, bringing the total for the data slate up to 44. All right, the first thing we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So looking at the top here, we had agents in at 60% win rate. They only had a few players, so it's hard to really take too much with that, but they still pulled out a good 60%. Next, we had Necrons coming in at 57. Number 3 was Grey Knights and Drukhari, both at 55. We had Orks at 54 and Imperial Knights at 53%. Down the bottom, we had Black Templars at 42%. Next was Tau at 43. Leagues of Votann and Tyranids both at 44. Admech and Death Guard both at 45. Looking at any of the standout here, Necrons, they had a bit of a rough week last week when I was looking at the data, and it was nice to see them get a little bounce back this week at 57%. They had a pretty good week. Orks continue to do very well on the back of More Dakka, not surprisingly. 54% win rate. Might not seem very high, but Orks kind of suffer from the same thing as Space Marines do. Anytime it's closer to 55%, it's really a problem because there's a lot of players who play Orks. They really love specific detachments or specific play styles, and they might not take the most optimal lists and more fluffy lists. And a lot of new players like Orks are a very popular army, so the win percentage does get dragged down a little bit. So anytime it creeps up this high, it is kind of a cause for concern, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. Next, we're also going to look at Drukhari. They had a really good week at 55%, and they have been struggling for a few weeks, so I'm not quite sure what the turnaround this week was, but I'm guessing it's a little bit more of a blip based on the averages I've been seeing over the past 6 weeks with them. And any other standouts, we had Knights at 53, Deathwatch, Demons, and Blood Angels all 51. Demons is doing still pretty good, even after the nerfs to Legion of Excess. That is helped out by the Shadow Legion being quite good, so it's propping their numbers up a little bit after that. And down the bottom, you see some of the usual suspects that we did last data slate. You have the Admech. Tyranids had a bad week, but they've been doing okay. Votann, Tau. And Tau seems to be the one suffering the most since the last data slate. Their numbers have been consistently low the last 3 weeks. We'll have to see if that maintains that going forward or if they are able to rebound a little bit. And then Aeldari right in the middle at 50%. Their overall nerfs have sort of brought them back in the middle of the pack, but they're still pulling out a decent amount of tournament wins, which we'll get into a little bit later. All right, next thing we're going to look at here is the army representation. So this is the percentage of players playing each army. So as a reminder, the average is 3.7%. So if everyone is playing every army equally, everyone would be at 3.7%. Custodes, since the last data slate dropped, they've been the top every week, and they maintain their spot this week with 8.3%, a really high number of players. And the next three, Aeldari, Space Marines, and Orks, are not surprising. Very popular armies and very good armies right now, especially with Aeldari and Orks. 7.7, 7.2, and 6.8. Demons maintains their popularity with Shadow Legion helping that out even after the Legion of Excess nerfs, and they're at 6.5. Down at the bottom, Imperial Agents 0.1. That's usual suspect. Black Templars at 0.8, Thousand Sons at 0.9, Admech and Space Wolves at 1%, and Deathwatch at 1.2. Space Wolves is a little surprising at 1%. They did have a really good week last week. It's kind of surprising to see them back down this low. Their numbers spiked up for 1 week and then dropped back down. So we'll see how that sort of balances out moving forward. Thousand Sons and Black Templars and Admech, not surprising. They didn't really get too many fixes to any of their issues, so it's kind of the faction abandonment kind of happening for those armies right now, especially since the last data slate. Players are probably a little disengaged with those armies right now. Sisters, 1.5%. Their win percentage has been going up a little bit. It's not like crazy good, but it's right where you kind of want to be. Maybe they could be a little bit better. I think it's a step in the right direction, but they definitely still need a little bit more help. And then looking at some of the stuff in the middle there, you had Tau. Despite their really low win rate, they're at 33.5%. So the players are still there. We'll see how that pans out over the next coming weeks. Tyranids, another army that had a down week, but a higher player count. Then you have Necrons and Imperial Knights, both having decent weeks and having pretty good player count at over 5%. It is a little alarming that the trend is sort of continuing from the last data slate, where the bottom 6 or 7 are very low and the top 6 or 7 are very high. So we're seeing a really large skew towards the top 6 armies being brought to tournaments. I was kind of hoping the data slate would bring some players back to those armies that were struggling, but I don't think we're going to see that until the next one, where they're going to do a bit more of an overhaul. They kind of go between a small update and then larger updates every 6 months. So hopefully when the next one drops, we might get the new mission pack and hopefully some very extensive rules updates and balance everything out a lot more than it was last Dataslate. Next up, we have all the combined stats for each army for the previous week. So we have win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 is the percentage of players for each army who didn't lose any games or only lost one game, so going 5-0 or 4-1 at a tournament. It's a good way to look at an army and just get a quick idea of how well they're doing. A lot of the armies at the top of win percentages will have the higher XOX1, and the ones at the bottom will generally have lower because people are just not performing as well overall. So it is a common trend, but it is there. You'll get some outliers here and there, which we'll go over just to kind of show like, oh, there's a little bit more play there if people sort of know what they're doing. So at the top of the combined stats here, we have Necrons, and then we have Orks, Drukhari, Chaos Demons, and Grey Knights. And now at the bottom, we have Space Wolves, Tau, Death Guard, Imperial Agents, and Death Watch. So Necrons had a really successful week, 57% win rate. That's way above average. 32% XOX1. That's way above average as well. The average, I think, last week is around 18%. So they're not double, but they're close. So that means 32% of players only lost one game at a tournament or didn't lose any games at all. So, most Necron players were doing very well. Orcs, another one that did really well, 54%. 28.8 and 6.8. And then you have things like Demons. They only have 51% win rate, but they had a 24% XOX1 and a 6.5% representation. And then you have kind of the ones that are kind of hiding some of their power maybe, or people still trying to figure some stuff out, or someone had good success with a couple lists. You have Sisters of Battle, 49% win rate last week, which is good. A lot better than they have been doing. Their XOX1 was 26%. So that means like a quarter of their players only lost one game or didn't lose any games. So that's really good. It shows that they're having a lot more success than they were 3 weeks ago. That number was down around 12%. The representation was only 1.5%. So still a low number of players, and that number might sort of adjust back closer to the norm once more players come back to the faction. But for now, you have those diehards who know what they're doing, and they're finding some play within the army. At the bottom, Space Wolves had a really rough week, 46% win rate. They only had 10% XOX1. Tau, really bad week as well. I think they're kind of saved by just the representation being 3.5%, but they had a 43% win rate with 12% XOX1. So overall, people just really struggling there. And same as Death Guard, 45, 9, and 4.5. So despite Death Guard's above average player count, they struggled to win very much at all. Only less than 10% of the players had any success at a tournament. So those are the armies kind of at the bottom. And then any of the other standouts kind of in the middle there is Custodes. Despite their large player count of 8.3%, they only had a 47% win rate and 11% XOX1. So while they're very popular, they didn't have a lot of players finding success last week. So we'll see if that representation stays as high as it is as the numbers sort of adjust after a few more weeks of the status slate. So next thing we're going to look at is the tournament wins for each army last week. So we have Orks, Necrons, Demons, Guard, and Aeldari, all with 2 wins each. Then we have World Leaders, Tyranids, Space Marines, Knights, Grey Knights, Dark Angels, and Chaos Space Marines, all with 1. Orks picked up another 2 wins. They've been obviously dominating in that field in the last 3 weeks, thanks to More Dakka. Aeldari and Demons both picked up a couple more wins. Even after some of the nerfs they received last data slate, they're still winning some tournaments, so there's still some play there. And I think Demons are getting helped along by Shadow Legion, and Aeldari is still running mostly on Unid right now. And then you had World Eaters and Dark Angels, who kind of struggled last data slate, both picking up wins, which that was nice to see. And it's a lot of the usual suspects in there, Space Marines, Knights, and Chaos Space Marines. And then we're going to look at the Subfactions, who won tournaments last week. Going back to what I was talking about in the previous slide, More Dakka won 2, Devoted of Unid won 2, and for Necrons, Awakened Dynasty won 2. And then you had Vassals of Wrath, Teleport Strike Force, Synaptic Nexus, Shadow Legion for Demons 1-1, and Plague Legion 1-1. Noble Lance, Hammer the Emperor for Custodes, their new detachment, Creations of Bile, and Combined Regiment. So overall, not surprising. We see More Dakka winning 2. They've pretty much won everything. Same as Devoted Unid. They were kind of the problem everyone was worried about last data slate, and they're still pulling out wins. And then Awakened Dynasty seems to be the new flavor for Necrons that everyone's kind of flocking to. They have the highest player count so far this data slate, and they pulled out 2 tournament wins. All right, and then we're going to move on to the tournament results for the current data slate. So this is the last 3 weeks of data. First thing we're going to look at is win percentage by armies. So at the top, we have Orks at 55.7%. Then we have Imperial Knights at 53, Demons at 52, and then we have Necrons, Chaos Knights, and Aeldari all at 51%. Down at the bottom, we have Agents with 38%, Tau at 40, Drukhari at 41, Thousand Suns at 44, and Admech at 44 as well. So not surprising, Orks are at the top at almost 56%. Like I mentioned, for Orks, that's an extremely high number. It's like if Space Marines got up that high, you would look at it and go, oh, that's a problem, because if any other faction had a sub-faction as dominant as Orks, they would be probably over 60% win rate. But because Orks are held back by other subfactions that don't do as well, and a player base who sort of has a well-rounded love for all the types of subfactions within Orks, you have those numbers brought down a little bit, but they are definitely needing some fixes. Judging by the results and judging by all the talk I see online, it's definitely a problem. Knights are doing really well. They continued their sort of strong performance at the end of the last data slate. They're at 53%. Demons at 52% is surprising to see. I thought they would hit a little bit of a drop back thanks to the nerfs to the Legion of Excess, but Shadow Legion kind of picked up the slack there. Aeldari's pretty balanced, 51%. They're still a little bit above average, but they're not doing too bad overall. And then you have in the middle there, you have World Eaters, Chaos Space Marines, Black Templars, Tyranids, Death Guard. They're all right around the 47 to 48, which is around the average if you include draws. And down at the bottom, Tau, they took quite a hit. They were doing okay. They were kind of middle of the road last data slate, and since the last 3 weeks, they've been just right at the bottom. Drukhari, not surprising. Also down below, they didn't really get any fixes to what they needed. Thousand Sons and AdMech also didn't get any fixes to things they were desperately hoping for, so not surprising that they're staying down there. Sisters is getting a bit of a bump. They're up to 47%, so those little changes did help them a bit. They're out of the bottom 5. They're not up into the middle or the top, but they're in a much better spot. And then you have Space Marines, Dark Angels, and Votan Tyranids all kind of hovering around that same percentage as Sisters. So overall, for the first 3 weeks, everything's pretty good. Despite Orcs' overall dominance, their win percentage isn't crazy high. And then you have a few armies that are pretty low, like Drukhari and Tau. So for the first 3 weeks, the numbers are looking pretty stable, and I think things will balance out a little bit. I imagine Orcs will probably get a balance patch sooner rather than later to sort of balance them out, and we'll see some new army come to the top. But right now, everything's looking pretty good. All right, now we're going to look at the army representation for the current data slates for the last 3 weeks. Custodians, as I mentioned, at the top, 7.8%. And then you have Space Marines at 7.6%, not surprising. And Aeldari at 7.2%, and Orks at 6.4%. And then at the bottom, you have Imperial Agents at 0.2%. That's not surprising. Black Templars at 1%, Death Watch at 1.1%, Sisters 1.2%, Drukhari 1.2%, and Space Wolves at 1.3%. So this chart kind of mirrors the weekly chart, not surprisingly. The bottom 6 armies are under 1.5%, which is a problem. You don't want that many armies that far down. You want a little bit more balance. Those armies are less than half the average representation. And then you have 4 or 5 armies that are almost double the average representation. So there's definitely a power dynamic that's not being balanced here. And I think that kind of happened because they didn't really adjust too much for the armies that really needed, like Black Templars and AdMech and Drukhari. They did fix Sisters, but then they added like 2 or 3 new detachments, and I don't think you're going to get the balance we're really looking for. I think it's kind of just a little bit of a patch until we can get to the next one in the summer, where they'll release the new mission pack and they'll do a really big sweeping change, and we'll hopefully see some adjustments then. But I have a feeling for the next like 8 weeks or so that this data slate is going to go on for, it's going to look a lot like this. You can have like 5, like the top like 8 armies making up like half the representation, which is kind of stale for tournament play. You don't want to go to a tournament and just see the same 3 armies every time you get to the table. But I just think that might be the world we're living in until we can get that next big change in the summer. And next, we're going to look at all 3 stats combined for the last 3 weeks of the data slate. So at the top, Orks, again, unsurprising, 55% win rate, 30% XOX1. And so 1/3 of all Ork players are going undefeated or only 1 loss, and they have a really high player percentage. So they have 6.4% of the player base. So they're almost double the average representation, and they're still doing that well. That's definitely a big problem. And you have Demons next. They're kind of just held back a little bit by their XOX1 percentage. Then you have Grey Knights, Necrons, Aeldari, Imperial Knights, and Genestealer Cults, all almost identical numbers. They're definitely doing well above the average, but they're all right there at the top. And then at the bottom, you have Agents, not surprising, just based off their player count and the results so far. Tau is the next one, who's also struggling quite a bit, 40% win rate, 11% XOX1, but they have a 3.5% representation. Then you look, the next up is Drukhari. Even though their win rate's almost the same and their representation is lower, they have a much better XOX1, so it's popping them up a little higher. Then you have Thousand Sons, Blood Angels, and then Sisters. Sisters are kind of being held back by the representation. If they were up a little bit better, up around 3%, they would be up in the middle of the board there. So overall, Sisters are doing pretty well. They're right about the average win percentage. They're right about the average XOX1. The only thing they're lacking is the players, and I think if they maintain these numbers, they'll come back in the next couple weeks as players start to see that there is, some play there with them. Any other standouts there? Black Templars. They have a 48% win rate almost, but they have a 20% XOX1. So there is some players, the diehards are still playing them, and they're finding some ways to win and doing well at some tournaments. Maybe not winning, but they're still, going 4-1 or 5-0, which is good to see. So overall, I think there is a large number of armies that are all within the same, section there in the middle. Anywhere from Blood Angels up to Space Wolves is really not that big of a difference. But as a whole, everything is fairly balanced so far. We'll have to see how it pans out moving forward. Orks definitely need some adjusting. They're way further up than anybody else, but for the majority of armies, they're all within that same bracket, so that's what you want to see. All right, now we're going to look at the Army tournament wins for the last 3 weeks, and this is broken down week over week. So each color represents tournament wins for a different week. So as you can see, Orks, they had 10 wins total. They got 5 in their first week, then 3, then 2. So they're just winning constantly. Aeldari, same thing, 2 wins each week, just nice and consistent, still pulling it out. Space Marines, Demons, and Astra Militarum, all coming in at 4. And then you have Tyranids at 3, World Eaters, Space Wolves, Necrons at Chaos Space Marines at 2, Knights, Grey Knights, Dark Angels, Admech, and Adeptus Custodes all at 1. So Aeldari, the nerfs didn't slow them down in the tournament wins too much. If it wasn't for Orks, they probably would have been winning a lot more, but Orks are just kind of such a menace right now. They're kind of masking a lot of other armies' strengths, I think, just because of how powerful they are. And Demons still playing out a decent amount of tournament wins. They're not leading the pack like they were the last Dataslate, but Shadow Legion is definitely helping pick up a little slack after Legion was nerfed. It's nice to see Admech get their first tournament win. It took them a long time last Dataslate, so they picked that up early, which is nice to see. And we still have almost half the armies without a win, so hopefully in the next coming weeks, we can get some more numbers on the board there. All right, and next up, we're going to do the faction focus. And the first one we're going to look at is Orks. And I think this is kind of timely because it's been a few weeks of them being a bit of a menace. So let's go look and see how much of it is. So first up, we're going to look at the Army Rep and the win percentage for the last few weeks. So Army Rep, right around where you expect it to be, right between like 5 to 7%, which is pretty average for them. Win percentage, you can see a jump for More Dakka. It was right around 50%, and then it went up to 60, but then back down to like 51, 54%. If you look at their average rates versus the meta in the chart in the middle there, their average win rate is 57. The meta average is 48. Army Rep 6.4 versus 3.7. XOX1 is 30.7 versus 17.7. Tournament wins is 10 versus the average of 1.6. And that kind of ties down into what everyone knows and everyone expects. 65% of players are playing More Dakka, with 20% playing Warhorde. And then you look at the win percentages down below. More Dakka has 61% win rate. And the only other one that's like really even close, but not really, is Tactical Brigade at 54%. You have Green Tide at 52%. And then you have the Big Hunt at 50. But then, you have Warhorde, who is the second highest played, and they're at 43%. So if those Warhorde players are playing More Dakka, I think Orcs' overall win percentage would be probably upwards of mid-60s. So that's kind of like what I'm talking about, where a lot of Orcs' strengths are kind of hidden by the rest of the players within the faction. And if you look at in the bottom there, I have Subfaction tournament wins, 9 for More Dakka, 1 for Tactical Brigade, and none for anything else. So clearly there is one problem with this army right now. And their ranks, out of 27, they're number 1 in win, XOX1 in tournaments, and number 4 in total players. So definitely a problem across the board. Hopefully More Dakka will get fixed soon, but I don't want them to nerf it too much so it's unplayable, but they definitely need to do something. Moving on, we're going to look at Tau. It's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum as Orks. So we'll take a look at the previous 8 weeks. Their representation has been pretty consistent from 3 to 4%, which is right about where Tau usually lives. The win percentages was, in the last Dataslate, right around 45 to 47%, and now it's down around 40%, so they definitely took a hit there. You look at it versus the average, win rate is 40 versus the average of 48. Army Rep 3.5 or 3.7, that's pretty close. XOX1 is 11 versus 17.7, definitely way down. And their wins are 0 versus 1.6. And a lot of that comes from the fact that everyone's playing the new detachment, the Experimental Prototype Cadre. It's 46% of all players. But then you go down and look at the win rates for that one, and it's only at 38%. So tons of people are playing it, but they're having no success with it. Weirdly enough, even though Crude Hunting Pack only has 3% of the player base, they have a 68% win rate. So I don't know if that's just a few players who really know what they're doing, or there's something there that people haven't discovered yet, but that's the only detachment seeing any success. Other than that, it's 40% or less. So they're in a rough spot right now. I'm not quite sure what caused the big drop off since the last Dataslate. Maybe you guys can let me know in the comments down below so I can help understand a little bit better. But hopefully something can be done, but I have a feeling unless players in the faction figure out what to do. Tau's going to be kind of like this until the next Dataslate. I don't see Games Workshop making adjustments for armies like Tau, where they haven't done it for Sisters and they didn't do it for Black Templars all of last Dataslate when they struggled the entire time. So it could be a rough couple months until the next Dataslate comes out for the Tau players, but hopefully there's a little bit more play there and people are still trying to find their footing, but it's not looking very good right now. All right, guys, and that's it for this week. Just a reminder, I did create a Patreon for those of you who are looking to support the channel in other ways. Go ahead. The link is in the description below. You can go ahead and take a look there, and any support you can give is greatly appreciated. And just a reminder, if you did like the video, don't forget to hit like. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. It helps support me, support the channel, and I really appreciate all you guys' support. So that's it for this week. Good luck in your tournaments this weekend, and we'll be back with the numbers next week. Thanks, guys.